We grow up with so much cultural conditioning, family programming, and societal pressure to conform to a patriarchal, white supremacist, capitalist, colonized indoctrination system that strips us of our individuality and cuts us off from our intuition. It destroys our connection to our authentic self. And depending on how much drama, trauma, or toxicity you experience in your family of origin, your community, your school, your environment, or the media you consume, you grow up with so many layers of programming, beliefs, fears, biases, behaviors, and emotional reactions that have all been in response to life. It's reactionary. So your evolution up to this point has been largely unconscious. So what if you could use your conscious mind to unravel the programming, to unlearn the conditioning, to reconnect to your truth, to reintegrate all parts of your authentic self, and rewire your brain, reprogram your mind? Would you do it? And how about taking steps to find your voice, to find your purpose, to trust your intuition and your innate healing intelligence so that you could heal your trauma and that of your ancestors and finally live sovereign and free? It's time to upgrade your life. Welcome to the Conscious Evolution Podcast. I'm Dr. Andrea Pennington, Chief Psychedelic Officer for Innate Vitality. In this podcast and our live events and retreats, we explore ways to hack enlightenment by integrating ancient wisdom and modern neuroscience with transpersonal psychology. From plant medicine and psychedelics to breathwork, mindfulness, and neurofeedback, my guests and I will shine a light on the unique capacity we all have to use our conscious mind to evolve individually and collectively as a species. Tune in each week on your favorite podcast player or the Pennington Media YouTube channel for interviews and discussions about holistic healing of trauma and adverse childhood experiences, burnout recovery, and intentional wellness. If you have a topic you'd like to see covered, send me an email to andrea@andreapennington.com. In this solo episode, please know there is a content warning for suicide and sexual assault. So if these things may trigger you, please listen to a different episode. I grew up in a toxic, dysfunctional family. And it wasn't until I was 50 years old that I realized the level of trauma that I endured, thanks to sacred earth medicines, Ayahuasca, and psilocybin mushrooms. My earliest memory was when I was 1 year old and I got spanked for wetting the bed. My parents divorced when I was 3, and I didn't see much of my father for the first several years after the divorce, but I certainly had his very stern presence over the phone to keep me in line. I was terrified for most of my childhood, afraid of being punished. But I hid my fear and I became the good girl. When I was 4 years old, I ran away from an abusive babysitter. I ran across major streets over a mile and hid in our garden until my brother and sister got home from school and could let me in the house. When I was 13 years old, I had suicidal ideations. At age 15, I ran away from home with my boyfriend. At 16, I dropped out of school and started hanging with the wrong crowd. Experimented with drugs, looking for love. I experimented with drugs, was looking for love in all the wrong places, and ended up moving in with a girlfriend who was addicted to cocaine and pregnant with her coke dealer's baby. I ended up having a run-in with the law, and that's when I made a deal with God that I would behave and live right. And that's when I became the good girl again. I was a bit of a perfectionistic, codependent, people-pleasing good girl, but nonetheless. My last year of high school, I was sent to live with my mother, and I endured so much racism when I got to Atlanta and colorism. The Black kids were not nice to me. But somehow, by divine grace, I survived my childhood. And I made it to university and medical school. And today I am a respected integrative physician, psychedelic assisted therapy facilitator, documentary filmmaker. I give international keynotes and TED Talks with millions of views and multiple best-selling books. I even have a roster of superstar and pop star, movie star clients. I'm also a proud mother to an amazing daughter. I am living my dream life now in the French Riviera with the man of my dreams. And I believe it's a miracle that I am actually healthy, sane, free from PTSD and depression and anxiety. And I'm sovereign with abundant self-love. So I'm telling you all of this because I am the epitome of post-traumatic growth. This is the capacity that we all have when we are able to look at our past and glean meaning, find new reason for hope in our lives. It hasn't been an easy journey. Psychotherapy was only minimally effective. And as a woman of color, it wasn't until I started seeing Black therapists and a Black shaman that I actually felt seen and understood. And it accelerated my healing process when I integrated psychedelics into my life. I'm sharing all of this because I want to destigmatize mental illness and psychedelics. I want to support my community and the world at large by understanding that trauma, depression, anxiety, adverse childhood experiences, we can go decades without really recognizing just how deep and lasting the effects are. But they don't have to last your entire life. One of the things about the human psyche that fascinates me is how adaptive our mind is and how protective the mind is. One of the things that really surprised me very early on as a physician was a time when I had a patient. I was taking a very in-depth medical history, and she got to the point of explaining that in her 20s, she was raped while at university. And as we were talking, she said, wait, no, that wasn't the first time. It wasn't the only time. And I was a little shocked when she told me that she remembered being sexually assaulted as a child by a family member. And at that time, I was only 30-something. It was very early in my trauma training years, and I was like, how could you forget something like that? But you know how someone says something that kind of strikes a chord in you? It kind of sets up a vibration of resonance. And for me, it was like a little note of fear right in the back of my mind. I was really scared that there might be something in my past that I had blocked out, forgotten, or repressed. And in fact, it wasn't until I started using psychedelics in sacred ceremonies that I was shown parts of my childhood where things were normalized, but today we would call them abuse. I'm talking about strict punishments and being spanked or having one's mouth washed out with soap, which is literally what happened at that abusive babysitter. If you cursed or said a bad word, you got your mouth washed with soap. If you did something wrong, you get spanked with a wooden spoon. My mother and her side of the family, they would, quote, box your ears if you did something. Or I could actually remember times getting hit with a hanger for doing something wrong. But in our family, it was kind of normalized. They said, well, that's just, they're old school. That's what they knew. Or, I remember asking a family member about this, and they were like, well, he had it coming. And the mind fuck for me came when I thought about this. If my child today experienced what I endured in my childhood, we would call that abuse. And the people who inflicted it would be carted off to jail, right? So for me, I was kind of shocked that in the last 2 years, since my mother had her stroke, it sent me into an emotional wave of grief and sadness and processing my life and sitting in a 12-step meeting for adult children of dysfunctional families and then sitting in ceremony with ayahuasca and with psilocybin mushrooms. I was really starting to have this wider perspective and a deeper view of things that I endured in my childhood, things that I had forgotten or mislabeled or sort of downplayed. And when my mother had her stroke and I was just sort of revisiting childhood, I talked to my sister, who she was there. She's 12 years older than me, so she remembers everything from before I was born and after I was born. And it was a revelation to me, because now I'm able to understand why I've had complex PTSD symptoms. And I've also been able to have so much more compassion for the teenage me that got into trouble and was acting out. And the real shift in having compassion for myself and healing myself came when I started to apply the exact same process that I did with my patients. I ran an intensive outpatient program for binge eating disorder, and I also provided acu-detox, that's acupuncture in the ears for drug and alcohol detox. And over the course of years working in an integrative holistic therapy practice, I developed a 5-step process using a biopsychosocial spiritual model for helping people uncover what led them to their compulsive or addictive behaviors, to get at the root cause, to heal the inner child, to integrate the shadow, and to start cleaning up the mess and moving forward with a new sense of purpose and hope. So when I started to apply the cornerstone process to my own healing and using it as an integration model as I was going into psychedelic ceremonies, I then used it for the integration of all these revelations that I was having. And it was through this process, this 5-step framework, that I finally arrived at true self-love. But it's like I never understood how it was that I could be successful, run the business, be on TV, la la la, and yet feel so miserable inside. Like I was plagued with imposter syndrome. I had this compulsive need to prove myself. And even when I did a good job, I never felt proud of it. I never felt like it was enough. I never felt like I was enough. And the level of self-loathing and self-hatred got to an all-time low in 2005 when I was only 34 years old. I'll let you watch the TED Talk so you can see all of the details. But it was in a moment of desperation that I called out to God to take my life. Because earlier in my life, when I was suicidal, I heard a voice tell me, Andrea, you're kind of woke. If you kill yourself, you might come back at a lower form. Now, at the age of 13, I didn't know any Buddhists. I didn't know any Hindus. I'd never heard people talk about reincarnation. But something about it struck me so profoundly that I agreed to not kill myself. And that voice also told me that I would get through it and that somehow this life would get better. So in 2005, when I was starting to have these very dark suicidal thoughts again, I knew I had already made an agreement to not take my life, so I called on God to do it for me. And as I flung myself on the bed, crying my eyes out and shaking, I saw this white light, and I was drawn into this light, out of my body, into this tunnel, and I felt such peace and such love. For the first time in my life, I felt love for everything, myself, for humanity, for life, and I literally thought God was answering my prayer. And when I got to the other side, I saw a life review. I saw how every decision and choice I'd made from a tiny baby until that day, it was very logical why I was so depressed and miserable. And in that experience, it was a knowing that I had that, oh, so you mean I could have chosen differently? And there was this presence next to me, a sort of a guide. And I said to this guide, well, if you're saying that I can choose who I get to be on earth, I'll go back. And that's when I saw that we are like little droplets of light, little droplets of soul essence. And when we incarnate, it's up to us to decide who we will be. Not our parents, not society, not the American Medical Association. And when I said yes to life, I was shown a vision. I saw a life where I was living on the French Riviera, walking hand in hand with a child. I saw that I was singing professionally, not bad, and that I would be healing with my hands. That was the only thing that I was kind of like, wait a minute, God, come on now. I've been this evidence-based, super duper serious research doctor, and now you're gonna make me a woo-woo healer? Everything else about the vision was amazing, so I said yes. I came back into my body. And from that point forward, the depression was gone. And I didn't understand what happened to me because I had never heard of anyone having a near-death experience without the death part, like being flatlined or in a coma or having an accident or being under anesthesia. And that's what inspired me to start traveling the world and speaking to other people. I did research and found that in many cultures, people have experienced this, or they induce the experience of these out-of-body, non-ordinary states of consciousness with breath work, with trance dance, with whirling, with so many plant, fungal medicines from Mother Earth, cacti. And as I started to explore this, I felt really compelled to share this with the world, because I wanted other people who have also been in psychotherapy, trying antidepressants, trying things that didn't quite work, these Band-Aid approaches, which is what the American sick care system is. And so I determined to shoot a documentary film. I experienced a trance dance ceremony with a Black shaman in Sedona, and he told us about this ayahuasca vine and mix that he was serving in the jungles of Hawaii. But when he described that you had to dig a hole, you're out in the jungle and you use that hole to puke and shit in, I was like, no, no thank you. In fact, it wasn't until 2017, so 10 years later, that I heard the call from grandmother ayahuasca. This time I happened to be in Peru with a beautiful tribe of yogis, and this amazing ayahuasquera led me in my first ceremony with the medicine. In that ceremony, I connected with the soul of my mother. And at that time, my mother was dealing with Alzheimer's and her memory was going. And she had been such a proud and feisty and fierce woman, someone who professionally I truly admired, someone who personally was emotionally distant and not much of a mother. But when I connected to her in this ayahuasca journey, I wept deeply. I grieved not having a real loving mother. I grieved for her because I recognized that she was an adult child of dysfunction. She lost her mom when she was 10 years old. She was rejected by her father. She never healed those wounds. And the other thing that I saw in that first ayahuasca experience was that we all are really made up of the same stuff, and that is love. And I forgave her. I also asked for forgiveness for the dumb shit that I did as a teenager and causing her grief. And for me, I have kept most of my psychedelic experience a secret because I never thought I would do it professionally. Like the first time I tried MDMA in sort of a clinical setting was in the year 2000. And I was so blown a way and my heart was blown wide open that it inspired me to research it. And I was stunned to find that MDMA had been used for years in couples therapy and psychotherapy. And of course, it led me to the work of Alexander Shulgin, or Sasha, and the work that he did with his wife. I got his book, Pical, Phenylethylamines I Have Known and Loved, where he open source put all of the recipes for a bunch of phenylethylamines. MDMA is just one of them. But I was fascinated by it. But again, I never thought that I would share this professionally. And it really wasn't until the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic. Because in 2020, in the middle of lockdown, my mother had a stroke. And I spoke to my sister, I spoke to the ICU doctors in America, and they told me, your mom's going to be gone in a matter of days. Don't bother getting on a plane because you can't get into the ICU and she'll be gone. And that triggered another wave of grief and reviewing my family. And before I made it to America, I had a beautiful 5-gram mushroom ceremony facilitated by a very dear friend, a magical medicine woman in Iceland. And I had a very dear friend with me. And in that journey, I once again connected with the soul of my mother. And in that time, I spoke French for like half of this 7-hour experience. I spoke French to my mother, and I told her to hold on because I'd gotten a ticket to fly back to America. And in that experience, it was the first time with mushrooms that I had a complete ego dissolution. I felt myself kind of crawling through the desert, just feeling this intense hunger pang. And I literally felt like I was dying of hunger. And I got to a moment where it was like, just let go. And then, poof, I disintegrated into dust particles. And that's when my consciousness sort of just blended into the energy of oneness. And I started seeing all these scenes and visuals of multiple parts of the world and other planets. And the knowing that I came away with is we are all part of this energy mix. It comes in, it comes out, it goes up, it goes down. And I came away from that recognizing that we fear so much about facing our shadow, facing death, and asking for forgiveness, and being open about what we've experienced. And after those experiences, I felt less of the shame. And I made it to America. I got to say goodbye to my mother before she passed. And when I came back home to France, I sat again in ceremony with psilocybin mushrooms. And instead of just grieving the loss, under the influence of the medicine, I saw this scene of my childhood, all the way back to the time when I was a baby. And I saw how the chaos in the family created like this negative vibration that was visual. And there was this sense of darkness that had seeped from my mother into me. This darkness, this sadness, this sense that I was wrong and bad and defective and that everything was my fault. And I have, as an adult, never had these conscious words in my mind, but it felt so true in the medicine that I was able to weep and really howl. I was crying my eyes out for the baby that I was, that grew up in that toxic environment and that took on so much and experienced this abuse. And as I grieved for the toddler that I was, I saw my mother take back the darkness, her unhealed trauma, and she went into the light. It was as if I was able to give back some of this intergenerational trauma that had been passed down to me and my siblings. And then I was able to grieve what I didn't receive as a baby, the love and the attention and the protection from my mother. I saw myself as a teenager, and I saw how alone I was. I felt so much more compassion knowing that I wasn't acting out. I wasn't rebellious. Yes, those are rebellious behaviors, but I was lost. I had no loving parent around in those most tender years. And having that compassion for myself and sort of unburdening myself of these thoughts and these beliefs that things were my fault, that I was wrong, that I was bad, that I was naughty, I gave all of that up. And I came out of that session feeling so empowered and so free that I realized I've got to share this. And especially because during the pandemic, I also lost a very dear friend who died by suicide. And I was devastated because she had sought treatment. She was even hospitalized, and they put her on benzodiazepines that so rocked her world and aggravated her mental health condition that she never made it out of it. And by the time that she called the suicide hotline, by the time they got to her body, it was too late. And I thought, if only she had access to these psychedelic medicines, maybe she wouldn't have been a candidate for flying to the jungle for ayahuasca. But what I know now about ketamine, for example, which is FDA cleared for suicidality, it could have bought us some time. And the same thing with my dear friend, Dr. T, who also died by suicide a few years ago. I feel like if I had shared a little more of my truth, then maybe he would have felt comfortable reaching out to me about his depression and his alcoholism and how he was not really coping with what was going on in his life. I say all of this to say that ultimately, I'm still standing. I'm still here. My most recent experience with psilocybin mushrooms revealed to me just how toxic my childhood was, and just a new level of understanding how it impacted my beliefs about who I am, about what I'm worthy of, about what I can achieve in life. And it's as if being in the psychedelic state has allowed me to literally be brainwashed, but as in washing my brain, unhooking some of these neural connections where I was so entrenched in the belief that I was bad and that I was wrong and that the things I did were shameful. I'm not proud of the things that I did, but now I understand them in a greater context. It's been through the power of sitting in ceremony with these plant and fungi that I now understand how this complex PTSD was impacting me my entire life. It's what inspired me to enroll in the Integrative Psychiatry Institute and in association with MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Studies. I'm in this certification fellowship so that I will be able to serve and sit with people who are taking these medicines, psilocybin and MDMA when they receive FDA approval, and ketamine, which is currently legal in the United States. So the good news about all of this is I had made significant progress just using the principles that worked with my patients with addiction and eating disorders. So the cornerstone process, which I outlined in the Real Self-Love Handbook that I've put out for free in the Real Self-Love movement, these are the exact steps that I took to find real self-love, to find my voice, to find the confidence to open up and share, and to seek mental health treatment. And yes, now I will be able to fly around the world and help facilitate or sit with people as they're coming out of their psychedelic journeys or provide integration support. But mostly I want people to know that there are techniques, there are modalities, there is a framework that will help you tune into your innate vitality code, your innate inner wisdom for healing. And yeah, you're gonna get triggered depending on how much toxicity you've endured. But there is hope, and there is another side to it. So that's why I'm here. That's why I'm sharing. That's why at the tender age of 51, I'm opening up about what I've experienced and what I'm hopeful for in the future. So thank you for listening. Please know that many of the psychedelic substances that I've been talking about, they're not legal in many countries. And I don't recommend that you do this without supervision. I know there are people out there who really feel like the medical model is not the right model. These things came from indigenous wisdom keepers for thousands of years. And I believe that being able to sit in ceremony with legit medicine people, medicine men, women, shamans, curanderos, ayahuasqueros, I believe there's incredible value in that. And because I'm a physician, some of the people who come to my website or to YouTube, they're people who would not be candidates for that. So whatever you believe, wherever you fall on the spectrum, you are entitled to your opinion. And I can definitely see the value of being able to use psychedelics in a social festival setting. That can be life-changing as well. And I've been treating trauma for 22 years with some of the sickest people you can ever imagine. So I want to focus on the harm reduction and the safety side of things. Okay, so this was a little bit longer than I anticipated for my coming out story for conscious evolution, but I hope that you found it helpful and inspiring. Check out the rest of the series on BIPOC psychedelic use. I'm personally very invested in bringing safe psychedelic therapies to the global majority because it's been pivotal for me and we deserve it. These medicines are part of our heritage and we need to right the wrongs of this colonial, whitewashed, capitalist system. To be continued. Want more info on how psychedelics may improve your mental well-being? How to choose a retreat? Or what to look for in a shaman? Get on the Psychedelic Curious email journal. The link is in the show notes and on my website, andreapennington.com. On my website, you can also sign up for my free masterclass series, where each month I take a deep dive into a topic in holistic healing, trauma recovery, self-love, and resilience. Thank you for tuning into the Conscious Evolution podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share it with a friend. Also, leave us a review and a rating on your favorite podcast player. This helps us get the content out to a larger audience. And to watch the video version of this podcast, visit the Pennington Media YouTube channel.